You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 65 of the DCAU Review. Coming to you a bit delayed today due to some programming issues, but better late than never. As always, I'm your host, Cal. Along with me, my good friend, my good brother, and the DCAU Review Twitter guru. That's right, Liam. Episode 65. We're moving past Justice League and we're headed back to the future, as we said before.
The future, Cal?
All the way to the year, what is it, 2030, 2035 or whatever it's supposed to be?
Something like that, 2039, 2041. I feel like there's a couple different answers depending on the version, but either way, we are back in the world of Batman Beyond. Of course, as we mentioned last week, it's the 20th anniversary of Batman Beyond originally debuting on Kids WB. They also just a couple weeks ago now had that panel at Comic-Con where they announced they're doing the full HD re-release of the series, similar to what they did with Batman the Animated Series a couple years ago. So it's an exciting time to be a Batman Beyond fan.
It is. It's always good to go back and look at this through the critical eye, as we've been doing with each and every one of these different series. But this in particular, we've had some great success thus far. We've done every Batman Beyond episode in order so far, and most from our recollection, which of course you can check back on the archives at DCAUreview.com. We can go back and check every Batman Beyond episode that we've covered thus far. But I feel like we have a pretty good average, Liam, as far as the scores are concerned. And today that we'll see if that continues as we cover the next episode in order, which is A Touch of Curare, which introduces a recurring villain who just happens to be named Curare.
Funny how that works.
Very interesting. Let's start by jumping in. Do you have our IMDb synopsis for this video or for this episode?
I do, and it is for the episode, as you mentioned, Touch of Curare. It was written by Hilary J. Bader. It was directed by Dan Reba, and the synopsis reads as such. Commissioner Barbara Gordon is determined to protect her DA husband from an elite assassin, and she definitely does not want Batman, and especially Bruce Wayne's, help.
I'd say that's a pretty good... They do such a great job. I don't know who wrote these, but they usually do such a great job of encapsulating in just a few sentences.
Is that somebody's job, you think, just to write synopses of various plots for television shows and movies?
I feel like it's probably crowdsourced, judging on based on what IMDb is, but...
More of a Wikipedia type situation?
Yeah, probably. But yeah, regardless, that is certainly the plot, as it were. So we might as well start jumping into the plot for this week's episode. As we always talk about, we got our 4 different categories and then our additional bonus category, in case you haven't listened to any of our prior 64 episodes. But this week we'll, as we always do, start with plot. Liam, what was your initial thoughts on plot? This is a new Batman Beyond Rogue. It has some connections to the old Batman the Animated Series and the DC universe as a whole, with the League of Assassins being brought in, as Curare is a member of the League of Assassins. But it's a brand new character in and of itself, with no real specific ties. It's not somebody's daughter or somebody's granddaughter or anything. It's a new character and a new foe for Batman, for Terry, our Batman Beyond Batman, to face. What were your initial thoughts on plot?
It's pretty straightforward, as we mentioned in the synopsis. We open with Barbara and her husband sort of just having a nice night out, and immediately they're attacked by this crazy new assassin, and then most of the episode is just them sort of being on the run, and Terry kind of trying his best to stop it, and kind of being outsmarted or outwitted by this assassin. And then sort of finally at the end, Barbara and Terry kind of work together and are able to take her down. And of course, we kind of set up for future episodes by at the end having Curare appear to be now a target of the Society of Assassins because she failed to kill her target. So it sets up some stuff for future episodes, and obviously it's I guess we got to talk about the elephant in the room. It's the first episode where we officially get confirmation that Barbara Gordon and Bruce Wayne were a couple in this world.
Yep.
And look, it has been pointed out by our friends over at the Watchtower Database, who actually just recently did a video on this exact subject. They weren't really, father-daughter type relationship in this world. That being said, it's still weird. He still dated someone who his former ward was dating at one point in his life. It's weird. But it is sort of the central focus beyond the Curare. It's like the B plot of the whole episode is Terry kind of beginning to find out more of, I guess, the dirty laundry, Batman and Bruce Wayne's dirty laundry, which I think is that. I mean, that's at least interesting, even if you, even if you're not a fan of the romance part of the Barbara Bruce relationship. That idea that sort of at this point in his life, as we know, everyone that cared about Bruce is either dead or he's kind of pushed away.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is and I remember back in the day, because it was even though this is the future of the DCAU review taking place, this is the first time that it was alluded to or mentioned that there was some sort of romance between the two of them. It's interesting because in Mystery of the Batwoman, they follow that up with a bit of, there's a scene where Barbara is in Paris, I believe, and she alludes to missing Bruce, and Tim teases Bruce while she's on the phone with him, which is a hilarious scene. And once we go down the road and cover Mystery of the Batwoman, we can certainly talk about that scene specifically. But yeah, it is eventually played out and played upon further on, and we know from at least from the Batman and Harley Quinn movie that Dick moved on from Barbara. He's hanging out and doing stuff with Harley, so it's not. It's it's a weird thought, and I think that comic book fans as a whole, especially if you've followed the main continuity of the DCAU or the DC universe, your general thoughts are that Batgirl goes with Nightwing. Like, that's just how it is. They're a couple. It's it's like Mary Jane and Spider-Man. It's like Cyclops and Jean Grey. It's when you introduce somebody else into that romance angle, it's like, this feels dirty. And then on top of it, it's you have Bruce, who's clearly older than her, much older than her,
right? And
yeah, you get a little bit of the heebie-jeebies. With that said, I appreciate the fact that they did something different, and then they went in a different direction. And you're right, the plot of this episode, Curare, while she is the villain, is more of a plot device, I think, for the episode. The plot is mainly meant to advance the character of this older Commissioner Barbara Gordon and what her life looks like now, her dynamic, and fleshing out what that dynamic with Terry is going to look like, what her dynamic with Bruce continues to be, and it adds certainly some depth to the series as a whole, because from here on out we have more interactions between Barbara and Terry, Bruce and Terry, and her sort of deciding to allow Bruce to continue with Terry. And then of course it leads to some great stuff with Return of the Joker and other dynamics that are fleshed out later on. With that said, I think that this episode did a good job of having a villain, using that villain as a subplot, though, because really, like you said, the main plot is finding out about what happened, how Barbara got to where she is now. She's married to the district attorney, their lives, her thoughts on why she's maybe not a fan of the vigilante justice that Bruce is encouraging Terry or allowing Terry to conduct as the next generation of Batman, and seeing that dynamic continue to play out throughout this series as we go on between Terry and Barbara as characters themselves. So yeah, I think they did a really, really good job with that. I knowing that Curare comes back. Spoiler alert: there's more episodes with her in it. And even the sort of cliffhanger ending where she's escaping and you see the sword break through the top of the police vehicle. That I thought was a great way of doing that. Interesting that we'll talk about an animation and visuals when we get to Curare as a from a design standpoint, but I really, really liked this, and I appreciated the fact that the villain sort of took the back seat, but wasn't a complete afterthought. It wasn't just a throw-in villain there. And then knowing that you get to see her fleshed out later on. So I gave Plot a very strong 8 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I'm right in that same ballpark. I went 7 out of 10. For all the reasons you mentioned, and I really liked the scene in the cave when Barbara first shows up, and Terry, it just like dawns on Terry suddenly, oh my God, she's Batgirl. And,
yeah, that was great.
And then in the back and forth between her and Bruce, there's a line that's actually very reminiscent of the new Batman Adventures episode, Old Wounds, where Dick is yelling at Batman, and Batgirl sort of speaks up and says, it's not like that. I volunteered to go on this mission, and Dick tells her, you just think you did, because he manipulates people and pulls strings to get what he wants. Right. And here some 30-some years later is Barbara now in the role of the person, telling the quote-unquote naive Terry, we all thought that we volunteered for this, but that's not really how it goes. So the idea of Bruce is sort of even maybe unintentionally manipulating these young partners he's had over the years, I think is a really interesting idea. And the idea that Barbara, who was once that sort of wide-eyed, more naive, more innocent heroine, now sort of being the one who's in the position that Dick Grayson was in a long time ago, I think was a really nice dynamic, and it really works well if you're familiar with that episode and with sort of the way that Batman's relationship with most of his partners seems to have shaked out in this DC animated universe.
No, I concur as well. Yeah, that scene where she comes into the Batcave. There's so many layers in that scene that are great. Her interaction with the Batgirl costume, and then the follow-up scene with Terry and her getting coffee, again, where you find out the dynamics of their relationship and the relationship, what happened with Nightwing. You get a Nightwing reference there. Nightwing gets a couple references in interactions between Terry and Barbara in further episodes too. But very, very, very good, and a great scene there, and great performances, as we'll talk later on, in voice acting. But all right, let's move on to our next category, Liam. We'll talk about animation and visuals. I mentioned it before when we were talking about Curare. Her look is certainly very unique. It stands out, clearly an assassin type. She has the completely covered face. All you can see are her eyes coming out of the look. It's a very Cobra Commander-esque, I would say, type hood that she's wearing. And she has this blue skin. Not sure that was we don't really find out a whole lot about her even further in the series, from my recollection. We don't really get a backstory of her, or if we do, you don't really get an explanation of why her skin is blue, which is a weird choice. It stands out because her costume is all white and she's blue, but you don't really get an understanding of, is she an alien? Did she have some sort of skin pigmentation disease? Is that a part of the initiation for the Society of Assassins or League of Assassins? Like, why is her skin blue, and why doesn't she want her face shown? There's a part where they're fighting where Batman rips off her mask, and you really don't get a clear visual on what it looks like. You see that she doesn't have any hair. She's completely bald, but you don't really get a look at her face before she kicks him and grabs her mask back. and which led me to believe that there may have been some sort of reveal they were going to do later on, or I'm not sure. It seems like Terry has a little bit of a gasp or something like that after he takes the mask off.
Yeah, actually, James Tucker was actually just recently talking about this on his Twitter. So the idea when this character has come up with, I believe Glenn Murakami is the one who sort of came up with the idea for the character. That the idea originally was that she was going to maybe be a future love interest for Terry, but apparently in the script for this episode, there wasn't really anything about other than she lost her mask and then kicked Batman and put it back on. So when James Tucker was storyboarding in it, he sort of wrote in the fact that she didn't have hair and she was perhaps a bit disfigured, and that kind of accidentally ruined Glenn Murakami's idea of her being like an Elektra type foe for Terry, which I think is that's just a hilarious little aside. But it does give you it's interesting because, as you mentioned, the visuals are really all we really have to go on with Curare in this case, because she doesn't speak, and other than some exposition from Bruce about her being one of the top assassins in the world and all that, we don't get a lot of depth with her, and obviously we'll see her a couple more times in the series, so perhaps we'll get a bit more of that as we go. But yeah, it was interesting having a character that was almost solely a visual character, because she doesn't really. So all we really know about her is she moves very gracefully. She's obviously this incredible fighter who's taking down just scores and scores of cops who are trying to protect Sam. And then, finally the combined efforts of Batman and Barbara are able to take her down temporarily. But then, they show how kind of immediately capable she is, because she escapes almost immediately. So it's interesting though. And I think the visuals are pretty strong. I really loved the sequence where they're on the train and she jumps onto one train and then does a flip and hooks a grappling hook onto the tracks and swings down to the other train where Barbara and Sam are and attacks all the cops. I thought they did a good job of it, I think, showing her sort of gracefulness and her, there's some art to her style, which is interesting. The killer that's also sort of takes pride in their art is an interesting idea.
Yeah, she has the obviously ninja type training that comes with being a member of the assassins, and yeah, they do a great job of it's graceful in the way that she attacks, and even a lot of her movements, and they do a great job visually of making her a clearly formidable foe for both Terry and, like you said, an army of police officers. This skinny, she's not exactly like a fitness model or something that's super ripped or something that that looks intimidating at first glance. She's pretty skinny and, again, blue, and but clearly the sword that she has, scimitar that she has, which cuts through 10 inches of steel at one point when Barbara and her husband are stuck in the meat locker. Just like nothing, it just cuts through. It cuts through anything.
A giant stone statue. It cuts through light posts and trees, and
yeah, it's pretty much an indestructible weapon. So, and a weapon that can cut through just about anything. So, yeah, they did a good job of making her a visually interesting character. I couldn't help but think, and this is more modern day because clearly at the time it wasn't prominent, and I don't even know if she was serving, but I have to say that Barbara Gordon's visuals remind me a lot of presidential candidate Senator Elizabeth Warren, and I could not see that after I saw it the first time. So a lot of the time I just kept thinking of, well, if they ever do a live action Batman Beyond movie, I know I'm going to call for the casting of Commissioner Barbara Gordon. It's going to be Senator Elizabeth Warren or nobody.
That's incredible. I hadn't thought about that, but you are entirely right. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yep. Cannot unsee. So that was a little distracting as I got into the episode itself, but that was my own darn fault. There's I watched this on the DC Universe streaming service, and I believe they've done the digital re-enhancement and color correcting and all that stuff on this episode. So I did notice that in the Batcave scene, Bruce looked a lot less jaundiced. We didn't have that weird yellow glow from the Bat computer that turned their skin yellow. So I did appreciate that for the color correction in the streaming service. Haven't watched a lot of the new digitally enhanced episodes of the original Batman the Animated Series, but watching this, I certainly appreciate the digital enhancement for that. With that said, I think there's a lot of great visuals in the episode. I think that the chase scenes, like you said, were really, really good. Chase scenes are always fun. They do them really, really well. And there's multiple ones from the start here, because the whole thing is she's trying to chase down Sam and kill him. By the way, that the whole plot was he's testifying against some sort of, they don't say Russian, is it from that made up like Russian country?
Kaznia.
Kaznia. They don't say specifically.
Yeah, I think they just kind of keep it kind of vague on which country he's from, but yeah, the name sounded very definitely that part of the world.
Very Kaznian.
Yes.
We'll just say it was Kaznian. And so yeah, visuals otherwise. You get a lot of shots of the police and different police vehicles and her jumping on things and Batman chasing her chasing Batman. Even the final scene, like in that meat locker, and when he ties her up and they kind of swing together and she crushes him with her legs, like when she's tied up, you see they cut to Terry's face and his agony, and then even the background of, like, as he screams in agony, you see like electricity in the background that kind of just enhances that feeling of like, holy crap, this is super painful. She's like crushing me. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was done really well. I gave animation a pretty strong 7 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I'm right in that ballpark. 8 out of 10 for me. Just for all the reasons we've mentioned. I think it's really strong and really striking, and some really cool shots where, like, Curare jumps and she sort of like swoops in front of the moon, and some really, really picturesque shots in there. And they, like I said, I think they really got over sort of the gracefulness and artfulness of this incredibly talented person. And it's a really unique foil, as we've already mentioned, because of her look and the way she uses the sword and everything. It's just a very unique type of villain for Terry to fight. And at this point in the series, he's still kind of young and certainly isn't a match for her hand to hand. But so seeing him kind of try to find different ways to use the suit's technology to his advantage and things like that are kind of cool to see as well. See him kind of be a thinking Batman, maybe relying more on gadgets at this point in the series than on his own fighting style. But yeah, I thought they did a pretty good job of communicating that. So yeah, 8 out of 10.
Agreed. Yeah. Last thing on that, it reminds me a lot of some of the chase scenes in the initial Catwoman episode between Batman and Catwoman. Those chase scenes were done very, very well. And the acrobatics and the jumping from building to building, and it kind of gives you an updated version of that. All right, Liam, let's move on to music. I was a big fan of the music for this episode. Again, I think that there wasn't one solid theme song for Curare, but there were multiple themes that kicked in, and when she would show up, I think they used that to the advantage. Again, you have multiple chase scenes. They do the music for chase scenes very well, which adds to the atmosphere of the intensity and just the excitement of Batman trying to chase down a villain. The whole thing is Curare hunting down Sam's trying to kill him. So of course there's intensity that is created and mood that is set by the music. I think, and there's a great part where Batman swoops in. I believe it's in the second act, or no, I think it's in the when they're in the meat locker in the closing scene where they actually use the Batman Beyond theme as a way to punctuate him entering the scene, which I was like, yes, this is what we've been waiting for. This is what I need. Like, this is what it's supposed to be. You bring in the Batman theme when Batman shows up, punctuates the scene, gives you that like hair-raising goosebump feeling when he gets in. I gave music a very strong 8 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went 7 out of 10. It's really good. The most consistent music, as you mentioned, there's not really one theme, is most of Curare's actions are, at least at the start of the scenes, are sort of all accompanied by this same kind of drumming. It's like kind of like bongos or conga drums. It has this very like native, native drumming feel to it, and it kind of builds from there, and then the guitar or whatever kicks in after that. But I thought they did a really nice job of building to that and showing her sort of when she's about to kind of go on her big run of just starting the anticipation there with that drumming. And I play the drums personally, so I'm a big fan of anything that kind of puts the percussion on the front lines of a theme or of an episode is pretty cool for me. So I really like the way they kind of would build the anticipation, where it just starts with that drumming very softly, and it gets a little more frantic and a little quicker, and then, like I said, then the guitar kicks in, and yeah, it's really effective. And I even like some of the softer music at the start of the episode when Barbara and Sam are just kind of walking and talking, and you kind of have a little bit of a sweet romantic moment between those two. I thought the music there really well. So it's a good example of sort of holding back when it needed to, and then really ramping up and building up that anticipation and building up to that sort of frantic pace. As Terry's sort of racing against time, trying to stop this this master assassin. They did a great job.
Yeah, I concur completely. All right, let's move on to our final category, Liam. It is going to be voice acting. This is where I felt like the episode may have been weakest to me. I feel, I don't know, it's hard. It's very, very difficult. Terry, of course, is great. Bruce is great. My issue is with Barbara. But before I guess we get into that, let's talk about any special players or anybody that we need to know about this week.
So, of course, as mentioned, we have Stockard Channing returning as Barbara Gordon. So interesting. She only does Barbara for about half the series, and then she leaves. I think starting with Return of the Joker, Angie Harmon replaces her and does the voice for the rest of the series. So I think she's all right. She has probably almost as much dialogue as anybody in this episode, and she has a very monotone voice, and sometimes that can be frustrating because you're dealing with these big emotional beats, and you're getting sort of all this exposition about the original Bat family dumped on you, and it's all kind of said in the same voice as when she's talking to her husband or when she's talking to other cops, or it's kind of I don't know, maybe that's just the way she talks. And the scenes where she needs to be like the no nonsense cop who doesn't approve of young Batman, I think are good, but there's not a lot of nuance for those later scenes either.
Yeah, that ultimately was my issue with when I alluded to that was just her delivery is so monotone, her delivery is so emotionless, and if you go back to the Batman the Animated Series, whether it was the original voice of Batgirl, who was Melissa
Gilbert,
yes, of Little House on the Prairie fame, whose voice was very animated, very dynamic, very warm, very youthful and energetic. Or then when it was done, it was Tara Strong in Batman the Animated Series, or New Batman Adventures, right?
Yes.
Tara Strong's vocal performance as Barbara, again, it's a little more, I guess, a little less chipper bright, but still had that youthful and I don't know, animated, like, I don't know other way of putting it, animated life behind it. And then I understand that the dynamic is supposed to be that now she's this hardened police chief and no nonsense. It just doesn't fit with the character as well to me, which is maybe why I think that the dynamic is such a stark contrast. And then you just have this emotionless, she just completely lacks emotion, even in her conversations with her husband, who she's clearly supposed to love, and she's married to him. It felt like she was like a robot. Like, it just didn't. I did not enjoy her performance as Barbara in this. I didn't even realize that her voice had changed halfway through the series, so it will be interesting to hear Angie Harmon's performance versus this performance.
Yeah. Well, and obviously there's quite a few episodes left with Stockard Channing in the role, so maybe she'll change her mind by the time we get to them. But yeah, in this episode, like for all the reasons we've just said, I think she kind of let it down. Some of the other players we had Paul Winfield as Sam, Barbara's husband. He was in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, probably the most famous Star Trek movie. And also in The Terminator, kind of both in minor roles, but been around, seasoned actor, and I think he does all right here. He doesn't have much to do, and a lot more of his stuff is more visual cues of him just looking sad and terrified. So there's not a lot asked of him, but I think he does an all right job. And then, so Curare does have a voice actress. Her name is Melissa Disney. And she's probably most famous for being the lead character on the Nickelodeon series As Told by Ginger.
Okay.
But it's like, I'm just fascinated that they brought in like a unique actress just to do like her fight grunts, because she does not speak at all.
Yeah, it's why I was going to ask you, like, jokingly, did they credit Curare with a voice actress? So that is very interesting. That I don't know. I don't know the thought process behind that. Again, maybe it was if they were going to use her later on in the series as somebody, they were going to allow her to talk. I don't know. They figured they would get somebody in there, a legitimate actress that could fulfill that role if necessary. I don't know. That's very funny and sort of a neat factoid.
Yeah. But yeah, overall, no big surprise. The strongest performances are, of course, Will Friedle as Terry and Kevin Conroy as Bruce. They're both quite good in the episode. So kind of a difficult episode to score for me, because again, I didn't hate Stockard Channing's Barbara Gordon, but I do agree with you that there was there should have been more. So I gave voice acting 6 out of 10. Kind of just, it's good, but if we had had like a stronger voice acting performance out of Barbara, or who knows, maybe if Curare had been allowed to talk, maybe the score could have been higher. But I'm sitting at 6 out of 10.
Not going to bring out the disagreement alarm, because I already have too much to edit anyway. But I will say that I'm okay with them not having Curare talk. I think it adds to the mystery. I think eventually they could have brought in some sort of vocals for her, but ultimately I don't think she ever.
Maybe she could have like a voice box gimmick, like Kane in WWF Raw in 1998. Crossover.
Yeah, but I absolutely concur with you. So much so that I gave this the exact same score of 6 out of 10. And just a reminder for the listeners at home, we don't discuss our scores, but we are related. So oftentimes our scores are eerily similar, if not exactly the same. So yeah, 6 out of 10 was my score for the voice acting as well. I'm with you. I think that there were just some scenes that needed more emotion from Barbara. I get it. She can be the hardened criminal, but in that in that scene with her husband or the scene with Terry where they're interacting and it comes across as robotic and I don't know. It just doesn't fit the character for me.
It very much feels like someone's reading lines off of paper, which is pretty rare for these cartoons. So maybe that's part of the problem too. We've just been so spoiled by some of the great and incredible casting choices that Andrea Romano made over the years. And again, I don't think she's like offensively terrible. It's just could have been better. Could have used more.
Agreed. All right, Liam. I think that brings us to our final scores. Tallying up everything that I did today, it brings us up to a final score of 29 out of 40. What about you?
And mine is a very, very different 28 out of 40.
Imagine that. 28 out of 40. We had the same exact score last week. We were 1 point off this week. You would think that there are going to be some episodes in the future we differ on. Trust me.
Sure.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for sure.
You'll hear that disagreement alarm sometime in the near future. But until then, thank you for listening. Appreciate you guys tuning into this week's episode. And hopefully we will have next week's episode back on time at 10/9 Central. Don't forget, you can check out all the old episodes, everything that we've covered before, prior Batman Beyond episodes, and each and every series we've covered episodes from everything except Justice League Unlimited thus far, Liam. We've also covered a couple different movies. That's all available at DCAUreview.com. Let's talk about we didn't mention rewatchability for this episode. I think for the character itself, I would recommend watching this especially if you're watching through Batman Beyond. At the end of the day, I don't necessarily think it's a must watch, although we did talk about the impact that it has as far as learning some of the depth or the behind the scenes of what happened and filling in the blanks between what happened at the end of the new Batman adventures all the way up to Batman Beyond. So would you consider this a must watch?
Yeah, kind of. This is a pretty essential, plot thread throughout the rest of Batman Beyond. Certainly it comes up again in Return of the Joker because, besides the sort of the headline grabber is the, Bruce and Barbara were a couple thing, but just sort of that overarching theme of where we find Bruce in the Batman Beyond pilot, this old man who's sitting alone in his castle with no one to talk to except his dog. It's pretty important in sort of establishing, more of that relationship, more of what led to Bruce sort of ending up alone like this. And I think it's must watch for that and for the fact that, it introduces a recurring villain. So even though it's not the best episode, it is, it's the nice part of it only being 22 minutes it's a breeze to get through. It's not like it's a real slog or anything, but even if it's not a great episode, I do think it's pretty darn important to the series and to kind of the overall characterization of Bruce Wayne and Batman throughout the whole DCAU.
Agreed. All right, sounds good. Any closing thoughts, Liam, before we move on?
No, as always, feel free to tweet us at DCAU Review with your thoughts on this episode and any episode we've covered. As Cal mentioned at the start of the show, all of our Batmans we do in order. So we've done the entire first season of Batman the Animated Series. This month we will be finishing, next week in fact, we'll be finishing season 1 of Batman Beyond and breaking into the first couple episodes of season 2 this month as well. So, but basically all the other shows, Superman, Justice League, let us know what you want us to what you want us to watch next. If you have any ideas, we've considered maybe breaking into like Static Shock or maybe doing some other Elseworld stuff. So always want to get some feedback, hear what you guys think we should do next, which shows we should cover for the rest of this year of 2019, and fan art, any fan theories. How do you feel about the overall relationship of Bruce and Barbara? Does it make your skin crawl? Do you not really care? This is certainly one of the most talked about topics in all of DCAU fandom over the years. So I am very interested to see just people's sort of gut reaction to it. when maybe they first learned about it. So definitely tweet me at DCAU Review and let us know what you think.
Absolutely. Well, that will do it for this week's episode. I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.